This is Writer Life, a podcast about writing, life, coffee and conversation with Rob and John Morgan.
Hello and welcome back to Writer Life. Today I want to look at a story within a story, which is basically the way in which I layer a lot of different ideas and a lot of different conversations and a lot of different parts of a story that surrounds a character within the actual main story of the actual characters that I'm writing about. For example, Heirs of the Kingdom, Robbie and Rune's lifestyle, which is what Heirs of the Kingdom's really about. It's about their life journey and experience as they search for the heirs. Now, it's been a while since I did an actual voice recording because I've been pretty busy recently. And this is a part of a writer's life that most people don't really see, which is the huge amount of work that goes on behind the scenes. Over the last few weeks, firstly, I've been working on sampler videos for all of the books, of which I think I've got 11 books out. They're all roughly around 5 minutes long. Those videos actually take me around 3 days to put together. So if you think about it, there's 11 book sample videos now on this channel. So that's actually 33 days of work. In between all that, I'm obviously writing new material. I'm editing material for the next book, which will be a Curio novel. And I've been able to do the final edits, format, produce, and put out to the general public the final part of the story arc, which is Violet Stone. And that basically completes that part of Heirs to the Kingdom and brings everything around in full circle. And I think all of the questions of Kingdom are now answered, and we now have the full telling of the story of Branner and Ariel. So it's been a really busy couple of months for me, and it's sometimes, I'm working at about 18 hours a day at the moment, and it's long hours, and I've not really had a huge amount of opportunity to actually just sit down, gather my thoughts, and prepare another podcast episode. So in between that, I've been adding the videos, so there's always something going on to the channel. But today I'm back, and I'm going to look at a story within a story. For the last year, I've been heavily involved in the writing and editing of two main stories in particular. One is the story arc trilogy, which I loosely termed as Of the Ravens of Berengar, and the other has been the main story of the Curio Chronicles, and before that I was actually working on Hans Cottage. Now, the stories I write tend to be written on several levels, which I've developed the knack of being able to layer these stories together, so that all these layers together, so that whilst writing one main story, within all the layers of that story, I've been able to simultaneously create another narrative or another story, which gives me a story within a story, which is what this episode of the podcast features. To kind of explain it in a much more simpler way, Hans Cottage is the story of Emily, and it centres around her feelings about her family, her dysfunctional relationship with her father. There's a hatred of her uncle in there, and the loss of her mother, and also the loss of her grandma Hannah, who has over the last 10 years actually become the focal point of Emily's life. So to Emily, Han is everything. Now, the main story is actually her journey through grief. It involves the questioning of all of her life choices and her inability to cope with people and life. Now, within that, there is also the theme of the plight of the Nairn, who are the small fairy-like characters who live on the island in secret, which Emily now owns, but she has absolutely no knowledge of. Their story is actually centred on their own journey, which was from Scotland to the island they're now on Emily's property, guided by a walker in the light, who is Randolph. And the story develops on how the Nairn now live in fear, because Emily has not embraced the light, and she's not become their guardian. And as the clock slowly ticks, because this is a time-sensitive thing, when Emily hits 22, it will be too late. So the Nairn are now living in fear that moment will pass, and when that happens, all their protection and all their security will disappear, and they will have to leave the island. Now, if you think about it, these are actually two completely separate stories, and yet they appear side by side within just the one story as a whole. And they kind of, they come together as they weave through the book as these mini stories that make up the whole of what has become one very large story that creates this idea of a grown-up fairy story. Now, it's sort of towards the end of the book that Emily finally meets Esme, who is a small Nairn who has grown to bond with Emily from watching her. It's at that point that these two separate stories come together and meet and become one, as Emily embraces the Nairn and then bonds with them, which leads to the end of Emily's turmoil, the saving of the Nairn, and also the setting up of their protection for all time. Now, the wonder of Hans Cottage has been the ability for the reader to empathise with Emily's struggle, whilst at the very same time being drawn into this tale of the Nairn and following the sheer belief of Emily and Felix as they break all of the rules in order to help their own clan by helping Emily to understand the full truth. Writing is sort of a game of ping pong. So, in this particular instance, I would jump from Emily to the Nairn and then jump back again, weaving these two tales together so that they both feel very, very real and almost like they do belong in the same book. And it's the merge at the very end of the book, it's almost like putting the icing on the cake, and it is the finishing touch that makes the book then one really big, whole and complete story. Well, the book has now been published, it's out there, people have read it, quite a lot of people have read it, it's been very, very well received, and one of the most interesting aspects of doing this after the book is actually out is that people then have conversations with me about the book that they've just read, which is Hans Cottage. And I've noticed how people tend to pick a subject that they focus on for that particular conversation, such as they'll talk about the belief of what comes after death as a subject, but not stray into the fantasy element of the story. Now, in a different conversation later with the very same person, they will then focus on their joy of the Nairn and all of their antics. It really is, sort of fascinating how they read the book and they naturally separate the two stories for the purpose of deeper conversations about the book's actual narrative. Now, I can't deny, for me as the author, it really is really, really fascinating to see this. And in many ways, it feels to me like the reader is kind of being very respectful of both of these stories that have become bonded together as the book heads towards its climax. And so the story within a story appears to be quite popular with all of my readers. Some who have actually mentioned to me in the conversations that I have said that they've come to understand this as part of my writing style. Now, the Curio Chronicles is written in a very, very similar way. The main body of the story is the sex positive and the body positive attitudes of the young compared to the old. And, within that, there's a lot of controversy, bullying, intimidation, and victimization. The story highlights how opposing views and attitudes actually divides the village into an almost us versus them attitude, on which both sides then are forced to defend their corners. These books highlight the hypocrisy of society and levels of corruption that people will go to in order to get their own way, as a group of curios band together and call out those who are willing to turn a blind eye to law breaking in order to stay in favour with those of power. It really is actually really current, because you can see this in the world all around you at the moment. Now, the story is a very, very modern and contemporary story for the time, and it addresses many current issues of today head on. Sex in the world is both loved and hated, and has become a convenient club to hit someone with, whilst hiding one's own sexual fantasies and fetishes behind closed doors. The immoral messages within the Curio stories show how people will happily shame you for doing something that they actually themselves are quite happy to do, such as Edwin, who feels his daughter's union with another woman is actually quite shameful to the family's name, whilst having multiple affairs behind his wife's back. One of the best examples would be when Edwin is outraged that there is a picture of his daughter on the front of the newspaper on which Birch's robe has come undone as she kisses Abby and greets her on her return from America at the airport. "Have you seen this? You two are all over the bloody papers again. Everybody's talking about it. Have you seen how you have embarrassed yourself?" Birch slipped off her seat. I pushed back my hand and I stood up. "No, Birch, this is for me to deal with. It's time it was done." She looked really nervous. My mum looked terrified. I walked towards him slowly. I will not deny, even now, he still scares me. But this time I was not running away. I looked him straight in the eyes and I faced him full on. My lover missed me and met me and kissed me. Why is that a crime? I saw plenty of people hugging and kissing their loved ones returning from being away. No one seemed to care that much. Does it really matter that much, Dad? Just because I sold a few books that the gutter press follow me? I'm a writer, Dad. It was bound to happen. You know, I always hoped you would be happy I was truly loved. But obviously not. He pointed at Birch with the paper. "It's completely unacceptable for public behaviour, Abigail. You know better than that. She was bloody naked in the airport and in full view of everyone." I could see his face was reddening. Well, going redder than it was. The booze had started the process. I took 3 steps forward. "Actually, Dad, she was wearing a robe, but it came open as she ran to me. Sadly, the news only printed that picture. They took plenty more of us all fully dressed. But there again, they took enough to choose the most sensational. I don't care what they print. I'm not ashamed of Birch. She's the love of my life. They can say whatever they like. Anyone who cares for me knows that they only print bullshit and lies. You know, I've got to say, Dad, I always thought you were smart enough to understand that." He got redder and waved the paper more. "She was bloody naked, and she was kissing you. You have a reputation to maintain. Do you seriously know how bad this looks?" I stared at him and shook my head. "Dad, I wrote a sex-positive and body-positive book, and I back up every word in it, because I actually do believe it to be right for young and old people. It does not matter whether her robe came open or not. They were there taking pictures. They would have put one in either way, and with a big sensationalized headline. That's what they do. They're like vampires, sucking the life out of everything. He shook his head and his eyes opened wide. His face was going even redder. "You look like a whore with her hanging from your neck. She was kissing you. Have you any idea of the damage this could cause to my family? Abigail, she was naked, for God's sake." I felt the sigh pass my lips. I really could not believe him being this entrenched in today's modern world. That's all you care about, isn't it? If it had been a naked guy with his dick out, I would have been fine. You would have laughed and boasted to your friends, "Look how heterosexual my daughter is." I was not naked. I was dressed. Birch is not your daughter. So why are you so upset? Her parents have not hit the roof. They understand how that paper only prints to sensationalize and ridicule. So why worry about it? It's not like we don't all know. Dad, I screw a woman, and I absolutely love her, and I'm going to screw her tonight, and tomorrow, and every day that I'm with her. His eyes bulged wide, and he exploded. "How dare you use that crude, vile language in my house? You will show me respect." God, I think I was starting to hate him even more. I was really getting pissed off with his narrow mind and village life morality. I'm 26. I'm an adult. Show me some fucking respect and I'll show you some. Why is it you cannot accept me for who I am? Why, Dad? I'm your daughter, your flesh and blood. I remember a time when you talked of Birch as a daughter, and yet now she's eating my pussy. You're insulted. Hell, that gives us more in common, doesn't it? I mean, come on, Dad. You had no problems eating your secretary. Did you forget that I saw that? I was 14. Did you care what I thought? I mean, you wasted no time chewing her face off. What else did you eat that day? Seems to me like you, Birch and me all like the same taste. I heard my mum snigger behind me. He stood there shaking, red in the face, and still pointing at me with his paper. I could see his anger getting even stronger. It really is an important part of the story, but there's also another aspect buried here, which is actually a story that starts to run through the whole of the Curio series of books, because it is here that we start to see the change in Abigail, which runs alongside the rest of the Curio's adventures, because it's within the series of books is actually the journey of Abigail's voyage to discover who she really is and how she fits into the world that actually surrounds her. The first book of the series highlights how, through Birch over a year, she's been given the space to be who she wants to be. It shows her inner doubts and insecurities as they weave through the narrative of the book, and it highlights her difficulty in finding a place where she can fit in. Book 2 and 3 are part of Abigail's awakening and the realization she's nothing at all like she thought she would be when she was a lot younger. Being at university was like an escape into freedom, but coming home felt like she was being forced back into captivity as she comes home to the manipulation and the victimization that has been her whole life. Only this time, she has changed, and she wrestles between remaining who she wants to be and who the village want her to be. It is again a fascinating journey at the start of adult life, and it's also a source of great insecurity. The Curio Chronicles is actually 2 stories. It is a tale of a group of girls and their boyfriends as it charts their life as teenagers and growing into adulthood, experiencing their freedoms and many, many misunderstandings of what being free is and becoming an adult really entailed. But it's also the story of a shy and bullied introvert, Abigail, as she faces her life she does not understand or has not even been equipped to deal with. Her challenges all become a part of her journey of self-discovery. And in the first book, I almost titled it Becoming Abigail. It was the fact that there were two storylines woven together through the series that ultimately made me change the title to Abigail's Summer. And as you look at the books that are published, their titles reflect this two-story style of writing, because the second book is actually called Curio's Summer, and that is then followed by Curio's Christmas. But once we get to the fourth book, that's entitled Abigail's Wedding. The next two in the series will be one more Curio title, and the other one will be an Abigail title. So the reader becomes aware of this kind of conceptual idea of two themes running side by side within the whole of the book series. There's actually a really wonderful story woven within the Curio books, which is actually Abigail's story. And I cannot deny I did wonder when I was writing the books just how many would be able to see through the wild behaviour of the group and at the same time understand fully the life of Abigail. Would a reader be challenged by the sex positive and body positive content to the point where they missed the powerful feelings and emotions which were experienced by Abigail as she looked inside herself and then wrestled with coming to terms with who she really was? Within the Curio story, there's also the back history and developing tale of each of the Curios, and their own personal stories are woven into the fabric of what is the main story of Abigail's life. I kind of really like this idea of being able to follow each of the characters alongside Abigail. So I've written it in a way that shows not just the Curios, but also all of the other characters. And in doing so, it builds up a very complete story of an entire village. I like this way of writing as I feel it represents life in a much more realistic way. Many times in the past I've read stories where characters come in and go out of the narrative, but I never really got to know more about them, and I always felt a little bit disappointed by that. You know, so many books when you think, oh, I wonder what happened to them, and well, where did they really come from, and how did things go for that person? You never really know. So when planning out things like Heirs to the Kingdom series, which actually was my first venture into real writing, I felt I wanted to show the whole scene so that readers would get to know and feel a lot more familiar with those surrounding the main characters. One of the things that I really, really love about Heirs to the Kingdom is how we meet all of those people who are living in the village. You know, such as Anne Kirk and her sister running the bakery, or even how Agatha Patterdale spreads malicious gossip, and how Reuben Stein avoids employing other people because he much prefers the peace and quiet of working alone. I feel that readers can picture the scene so much better by knowing the others, and again, it replicates real life. Because no matter what we do each day, we end up running into and interacting with quite a lot of other people. And I wanted my stories to kind of reflect that feeling, which again is another reason why when I get asked what genre do I write in, I tend to say I'm a slice of life writer. You know, I pick my characters and I write their life, their experience. So I take a slice of their existence, and that is what I put onto paper. I think telling short stories of these characters within the story, it deepens the story, and that adds a little extra value to the main story, which then, you know, as you read through the book or the series, it starts to feel more and more like real life. This style of writing on multiple levels and intertwining other small stories is something I've found really does allow me complete writing freedom. And it does it on a level that matches my imagination during the creation of each story. If you think about it, David and Henry at the gates are a very small part of Heirs to the Kingdom, and yet we see David fall in love and how Henry fully endorses that and, is in his corner supporting him all the way through the series. It's a really, really tiny little detail, and yet it becomes as relevant as the main plot of the story, and that breeds yet more realism into what are at times very, very emotional scenes. I think any story written has to contain real emotions and reactions so that it becomes utterly believable by the reader. Flat, emotionless characters will never hold the attention of a reader long enough to finish the book. And the best way to express a character is to show their life, show their emotion, show their joy. I've got a reputation for sort of tearing up the rule book and writing my own way. But even I'm smart enough to understand that if the characters do not have life and they don't step off the page, my story will be doomed before the first chapter is finished. I'm now in a position where I've been seriously writing my fictional tales for a little over 20 years. I actually think that I've come a long way in all of that time. I certainly know, having combed through my back catalogue recently, that in Heirs to the Kingdom alone, each book as it came out was much better than the book written previously. I think the only way, really, as a writer, to hone your skills is to simply keep writing. And I see that when I compare the two series that I've written around Kingdom and the Curios, and I put them back to back. Now, it's obvious to me that the Curio stories are much better developed and far more sophisticated than what I was writing in my earlier days. But saying that, I think that the 3-book trilogy of Rise of the Raven, The Countess of Darkness, and now the very newly released Violet Stone have taken yet another step up, as they were all written after I wrote the Curio Chronicles series, which was way back in 2020. I think if a writer can step back and really look at their own work with a constructive eye, then they have the ability to develop in a much more organic way. There's no bigger critic of my writing than myself. And I'm also very lucky in so much as I have a wife who is an absolute avid reader. And she will sit and go over my manuscripts and give me lots of really good feedback. She's not always polite about it, and she tells me, certain elements that have to be better. But she never does it in a nasty way. And I've learned over the 16 years that we have been together that she really does understand my style, almost, I would say, as well as I do. And so for me, as a writer who's trying to put a book together that will please an audience, her advice has some very great merit for me to then work with and improve. One of my reasons behind putting together the Writer Life YouTube channel was that I kind of hoped that people would stumble onto it who want to be writers, and they're kind of struggling with concepts and ideas, which is why I put up, I don't know how many episodes now, I've not looked, all these episodes about where I draw inspiration from, where I get my creativity from, how I put my stories together. And again, this is just yet another example of me explaining my writer's style. There's the added bonus that readers of my work can come on and they can have a listen and they can get a good idea of where I'm coming from. So maybe, in a way, they understand the books they've read better. But I do think that for new writers especially, there's some good information on this channel that may help them. It's not a specific channel to teach writing, because, I'm not the world's most successful author. I don't think I'd have a right to do classes on how to write, and I don't do that. I talk about my style, my writer life. But I hope there would be an influence within there that would give someone the creative spark to say, yes, that's what I'm not doing, and go out there and improve their own work. Because we need more writers. And with the rise of AI, I'll get right in a minute, with the rise of AI, we've now got these robots that are scanning every piece of writing on the planet, picking bits out and then reassembling it. And basically what it is that everything that an AI produces now is absolutely plagiarized from other sources, which are not given credits. So if I can encourage people to go away and ignore all that and be creative in the way in which they think, they construct, and they write, I think that's a really, really great thing. And one of the golden rules, I think, is that the real savior of all writers is actually editing. I've come across a few people in my time who've told me they want to be a writer, and I've always given them the advice that, the best way to write is just get it down. It doesn't matter how much gobbledygook's in there, it doesn't matter how bad it is, just write it, get it down. Because once you've got the story down, what you've then got is a computer with a file on it that has everything you thought would be a great story. And at that point, you can start to edit. And it's the editing that polishes the story, corrects the issues, adds extra narrative or adds extra description, polishes up certain descriptions. That's what makes the story readable. My basic manuscripts are exactly that. They are basic. And I comb over them far more times than I wish to remember before anybody even gets to read them. Each time I edit, I have a very set focus and ensuring that the small stories woven within the main story are complete and give enough detail. And that is actually one of my most important editing tasks. I have to get that detail in there. I have to make sure that even though I'm not writing a huge aspect of the book on this little backstory, the backstory makes sense and fits in with the current narrative of the main story. So I set myself these tasks, and in a sense it's like each time I go over the story, I just focus on one of the layers. And so it could be surrounding description or facial gestures or how the background characters live and interact. I focus on just one aspect and I get that right, and then I can go back to page 1 and go through it again and focus on a different aspect and get that right. It all serves a purpose towards the final polishing of the manuscript before it goes to proofing, and then the final edit for production. It's quite normal for me to make a statement such as Hans Cottage was written over 6 years, because realistically it was. I combed over it in the last 2 years, making small tweaks before I felt it was finally ready to read. And the thing had been on my computer for years before I let my wife read it. The same really, I think, goes for the Curio Chronicles, because I rattled that out in 6 months. I wrote it back to back, never stopping. Every day I was writing something. And I wrote that during the lockdowns of 2020. And yet here we are now in 2024. And I'm still editing each book as it comes to print. I'm actually doing the final edits for the 5th book, which, I'm hoping will come out later in the year. But I can honestly say with my hand on my heart, it's been edited at least 60 times already in the last 4 years. But that is how I work. Some people don't have to be that kind of intense. As long as you're editing and you're going through the book and you're happy with it, that's what's important. I find it works for me. Now, once I publish a book, I'm just far too busy with other books to worry. I mean, we've just dropped Violet Stone, which is out there now. And I mean, Violet Stone has been on my desk and I've been going through it, for the last 2 years. Because I wrote it I wrote it over a period of years, but I think I got to the end of it and finished it somewhere around 2 years ago. And for the last 2 years, it's been in the editing process. And now finally that's moved on down the line. That's gone out to print. And I'm now working on a different book. And in between all of that, I'm also writing new material. Because I'm working on a completely different fantasy story now, which is set in a different world with different characters, completely different sorts of races. And I'm working through that project at the same time as doing all the other crazy stuff I do as a writer. Because my entire life is writing. That's all I do. I don't do anything else. It's why I'm poor. I don't have time to go out and get a massively paying job. I just focus everything I've got into the creative stories that I put together. And in a sense, I feel very privileged that I can do that. I'm very happy with the fact that I can just devote my entire time to my crazy imagination. So once I publish, I'm just far too busy with other books to worry. I kind of finally let them go. It's like freeing your children into the world. It's like, that's done. That's got an ISBN. That's gone through the process. It's now being printed. And I really, really hope someone likes the book enough to buy it and read it and enjoy it. But I'm too busy to worry. I'm now going to get on with the next book, which in this case is book 5 of the Curio Chronicles. That's what I do. It's who I am. I layer stories together. And that's what I actually call a writer's life.
Thanks for listening to the Writer Life podcast. If you have enjoyed this episode, or there are areas of Robin's stories you would like him to discuss, please add your thoughts and questions in the comments, and we will include them in a future episode. You can follow Robin on all his social media links, which you will find listed below, and please, like and subscribe to this channel, so you get the latest notifications when he posts. All Robin's books are available in digital and print formats to purchase or download through all online book sales sites.